Diane Keaton's funeral, Goldie Hawn stuns the entire world with powerful tribute. The world stopped breathing. Goldie Hawn dropped the phone and whispered, "No, not Diane." In that moment, Hollywood's brightest light went out, and her best friend's voice broke the silence. The world stopped. Goldie Hawn's phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Her voice broke. "No, not Diane." Within minutes, the story hit every screen on Earth. Diane Keaton, gone, age 79. For a moment, Hollywood went completely silent. The city that never sleeps, the city addicted to attention, stood still. Paparazzi froze. Agents cried in parking lots. Even the Walk of Fame felt cold. Outside Diane's California home, fans began to gather. No red carpets, no photographers, just strangers holding white roses standing in complete silence. But what broke the world's heart wasn't just her death. It was what happened next. Goldie Hawn, Diane's lifelong friend, the woman who had shared laughter, tears, and decades of stardom with her, stepped up to the microphone at the private funeral. Her hands were shaking, her mascara ran, and she said 7 words that stunned everyone. "She made us brave enough to be real." The crowd didn't clap, they didn't breathe. It was the kind of silence that feels holy, when you realize you're not just saying goodbye to a star, but to the part of yourself that believed she'd live forever. Reporters outside didn't need to exaggerate. The truth was already cinematic. Inside those gates, 2 of Hollywood's golden girls had just proven something almost no one in that city dares to admit. Behind every perfect smile, there's a storm. Long before Diane Keaton became the woman who redefined what it meant to be fearless, before The Godfather, before Annie Hall, before the hats and the laughter, she was just a quiet, awkward girl from Los Angeles. Her father, Jack, was strict, sharp suits, short temper, a man who believed emotions were dangerous. Her mother, Dorothy, was the opposite. Soft, radiant, once crowned Mrs. Los Angeles, 1955, she was the dreamer of the family. Until the dream ran out. Diane grew up watching her mother slowly fade. The pageant queen turned housewife, smiling at dinner, while her eyes begged for something more. And that haunted Diane for the rest of her life. "My mum's silence," she once said, "was the loudest thing I ever heard." From then on, Diane swore she would never vanish. She wouldn't shrink herself to fit a man's life. She wouldn't disappear into someone else's story. She was strange, yes, loud when she should have been quiet. Her teachers called her dramatic. Her classmates thought she was weird, but Diane wasn't weird. She was awake in a world that told women to sleep. At 16, she walked onto a school stage wearing her mother's old dress, playing Blanche Dubois in a streetcar named Desire. The crowd didn't expect much, but by the end of her performance, they were crying. That night, she realized something terrifying and electrifying. Acting wasn't pretending. It was permission to finally say what she was never allowed to say at home. It became her rebellion, her therapy, her escape plan. She didn't just want fame, she wanted freedom. Years later, she'd tell interviewers, "I became an actress to make noise in a world that told me to be quiet." And that noise became her legend. New York City, the streets were loud, dirty, and alive. The kind of place that either breaks you or builds you. Diane Keaton arrived with 1 suitcase, a handful of dreams, and barely enough cash to buy a sandwich. She slept in a roach-filled apartment, auditioned with shaking hands, and told herself every morning in the mirror, "You're not leaving this city until it knows your name." The city ignored her. For months, she faced rejection after rejection. Directors told her she was too nervous, too strange, too unpredictable. But that unpredictability, the thing they couldn't label, would soon make her unforgettable. One night, Diane walked into an audition for a controversial Broadway show called Hair. She didn't sing the way the others did. She didn't smile. She didn't charm. She just stood there and delivered her lines like a confession. The room went quiet. The director leaned forward and said, "That was raw." She got the role, and that moment changed everything. Hair wasn't just a show. It was rebellion. It was youth screaming against conformity, and Diane fit right in. But even in that chaos, she stood out. Critics called her performance strangely hypnotic. Audiences couldn't take their eyes off the girl who looked fragile, but spoke like she had nothing left to lose. And that's when Hollywood called. One phone call later, Diane was on a plane to Los Angeles for a movie audition, a small role in a little project directed by Francis Ford Coppola. The name of the movie? The Godfather. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. When The Godfather hit theaters in 1972, Diane Keaton wasn't just in a movie, she was in a masterpiece. Her role as Kay Adams, the woman who loves a man she can't control, became iconic. Audiences saw something different in her. She wasn't polished like other leading ladies. She was unpredictable, real. She brought something to Hollywood it didn't know it needed. Imperfection. And America couldn't look away. That shy girl from Los Angeles, the one who came from silence, had just shaken the entire world awake. Fame hit Diane like a hurricane. Overnight, she went from starving actress to national obsession. Magazine covers, interviews, flashing lights. The world wanted every piece of her. But here's what no one saw. Diane hated it. She once said, "Fame feels like being loved by strangers and misunderstood by everyone who actually knows you." Behind those iconic hats and nervous smiles was a woman terrified of being swallowed by her own success. The more famous she became, the more she hid behind characters. Play the charming girlfriend, play the quirky woman, play the one who never asks for too much. But inside, Diane was burning out. Then she met a man who would change everything. Woody Allen. Together they made Annie Hall, a movie that felt less like acting and more like confession. Diane wasn't playing a role anymore. She was the role, the clothes, the awkward pauses, the humor, the heartbreak, all hers. And it worked. Annie Hall became a cultural explosion. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Actress for Diane. Overnight, she became the face of a new kind of woman, one who didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. But even as the world worshipped her, Diane felt something darker creeping in: isolation. She said in an interview years later, "After Annie Hall, I'd walk into rooms full of people who adored me, and I'd never felt lonelier." She'd built an image so beloved that she couldn't escape it. The world didn't see Diane anymore. They saw Annie Hall. And when the lights went out, she sat alone in her apartment, Oscar on the table, silence in the air, asking herself, is this what success feels like? She had conquered Hollywood, but Hollywood in return had quietly conquered her. After Annie Hall, Diane Keaton had it all: an Oscar, power, admiration. She was the woman every director wanted, and the woman every actress secretly wanted to be. But what no one saw, what the glossy magazine covers never showed, was that Diane was falling apart. The fame that once felt like magic began to feel like a trap. Every interview, every photo shoot, every red carpet smile became another performance. Another version of herself she didn't even recognize. She'd walk into Hollywood parties, smiling for cameras, while a voice inside whispered, "You don't belong here anymore." By the mid-1980s, the lights started to fade. A few box office flops, a few brutal reviews, and suddenly Hollywood, the same town that worshipped her, began to move on. Diane called it the Great Quiet. For the first time in her life, no one was calling. No one was asking. She was 40, alone, and standing in the ruins of everything she thought she wanted. Friends later said she'd spend nights walking through her empty house in Beverly Hills, barefoot, wineglass in hand, talking to the framed photos of her mother on the wall. She'd say, "I made it, Mom. I made it, but I'm still scared." That was the part of fame no one talked about, the silence after applause. But instead of breaking, Diane did something Hollywood never saw coming. She disappeared. No press, no premieres, no gossip. She walked away, Mom, not out of defeat but survival. In her own words, "I had to remember who I was without the camera on." While the world chased her shadow, Diane Keaton was rebuilding her soul, quietly, deliberately, and without an audience. What came next wasn't a comeback, it was a rebirth. Hollywood was changing, louder, faster, younger. And then, out of nowhere, came a film that no one expected to matter so much: The First Wives Club. On that set, 3 women, Diane Keaton, Goldie Hawn, and Bette Midler, turned heartbreak into comedy, pain into power. But for Diane, something deeper happened. She met Goldie Hawn. And that friendship became her lifeline. Goldie was sunshine where Diane was shadow. Goldie wore sequins, Diane wore hats. Goldie believed in love, Diane believed in irony, yet somehow they clicked like sisters who'd been separated at birth. During filming, they'd stay late on set talking about everything: fame, family, fear. One night, Goldie found Diane crying quietly in her dressing room after a long scene. "You okay?" Goldie asked. Diane smiled through tears. "I'm just tired of pretending." Goldie sat down beside her and said, "Then stop pretending. You've already done enough." It was such a simple thing to say, but it broke something open in Diane. From that day forward, she wasn't acting anymore. Not in that movie, not in life. Their friendship became legendary, the kind that doesn't need the spotlight to shine. When Diane adopted her first child, Goldie was one of the first to show up with gifts, laughter, and a handwritten note that said, "You've always played the mother. Now you get to be one." The two women aged together in an industry terrified of wrinkles. They made fun of Botox, laughed at tabloids, and turned aging into rebellion. Goldie once joked, "Diane and I never got old. We just got louder." And she was right. Through heartbreaks, health scares, and quiet years, Diane and Goldie stayed inseparable, the last proof that Hollywood friendships can be real. So, when the day came that Diane was gone, it wasn't a press release that broke the internet. It was Goldie's eulogy, soft, trembling, and raw, reminding the world that behind the fame, behind the glamour, behind the laughter, there was just love. By the time the cameras stopped calling, everyone assumed Diane Keaton was finished. What they didn't know was that she was just getting started. While her peers chased younger roles and new faces, Diane was quietly chasing something far rarer: peace. She sold her mansion, moved into a modest Spanish-style house, and began filling it with photographs, journals, and rescued furniture she restored by hand. Then, in her 50s, she did something that made Hollywood gasp. She adopted a baby girl, Dexter. No publicist, no magazine deal, just a woman who finally wanted a family on her own terms. "I'd spent my life pretending to be other people," she told a reporter later. "This time, I just wanted to be Mum." Nights that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter and spilled orange juice and bedtime stories. 5 years later, she adopted a son, Duke. Suddenly, the woman once terrified of loneliness was running on 3 hours of sleep and loving every minute. And as the diapers piled up, so did new film offers, roles that celebrated age, wit, and imperfection instead of hiding it. Something's Gotta Give, The Family Stone, Book Club. Each one proof that Diane Keaton didn't need to chase youth to stay relevant. She had turned motherhood into her masterpiece and time into her co-star. People began to realize something remarkable. Diane Keaton wasn't the woman who'd grown old. She was the woman who'd finally grown free. Through it all, one friendship stayed like gravity: Goldie Hawn. Hollywood friendships usually fade when the credits roll. Theirs didn't. They called each other before every big decision, every heartbreak, every new script. When one of them got an award, the other sent flowers shaped like a middle finger with a note that read, "Don't get cocky." They were opposites: Goldie the sunbeam, Diane the thundercloud. But together they created balance. In a town obsessed with staying young, they laughed about getting older. They compared wrinkles like trophies. "Each one's a story," Goldie would say, tracing the laugh lines on Diane's face. Their dinners became legend: long talks, red wine, no filters. They dissected fame, love, and men who thought they were the main characters. When tabloids tried to pit them against each other, they just laughed. "They'll never understand sisterhood," Diane told her daughter. "They keep mistaking it for rivalry." And that's what made their bond powerful. It wasn't built on gossip or glamour, but on truth. Two women who had seen fame, survived it, and learned that real connection outlives the camera flash. Every time Diane appeared on screen, Goldie cheered from the front row. And every time Goldie stepped into a spotlight, Diane's laugh could be heard somewhere in the crowd. They were living proof that the most radical thing a Hollywood woman can do is love another woman loudly, without competition, without apology. Most actors spend their whole careers begging Hollywood for permission. Diane Keaton didn't ask. She rewrote the rule book and then burned it. In the early 2000s, when studios whispered that women over 40 were box office poison, Diane looked straight into the camera and said, "Watch me. Something's Got to Give dropped, and the world lost its mind. Here was a woman, silver streaks in her hair, no filters, no pretense, making Jack Nicholson look nervous on screen. People didn't just laugh, they saw themselves. Every line, every tear, every imperfect smile felt real. Critics called it a comeback, but they were wrong. It wasn't a comeback. It was a takeover. She proved that authenticity sells, that women could age on camera and still radiate desire, depth, and humor. And she did it all without becoming someone else. No plastic perfection, no fake softness, just Diane, unpredictable, funny, brutally honest, and completely magnetic. Behind the scenes, she turned down roles that didn't challenge her, even when they came with million-dollar paychecks. She said, "If it doesn't scare me, it's not worth doing." Directors feared her standards. Co-stars adored her unpredictability. One actor once said, "Working with Diane is like dancing on a cliff. Terrifying, but you never forget it." And that's exactly why the audience couldn't look away. Diane Keaton wasn't chasing relevance. She was relevance. Living proof that bravery is more attractive than perfection. When the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, Diane didn't fade into nostalgia. She became something Hollywood rarely sees. A legend who still feels human. Her home in Los Angeles isn't a mansion lined with trophies, it's a living museum of stories. Hundreds of photographs hang on every wall, snapshots of clouds, broken chairs, strangers on the street. "I take pictures," she once said, "because I don't trust time to remember." And that's her legacy. Not the Oscars, not the fame, but the way she captured life. She taught an entire generation that beauty isn't youth, it's honesty, that confidence isn't loud, it's quiet and unshakable. That laughter is more revolutionary than glamour. Every young actress who dares to be awkward, strange, or vulnerable on camera, that's Diane's influence. Every woman who walks into a room without apologizing for her age, that's Diane's rebellion, still echoing. In a world obsessed with staying young forever, Diane made growing older look like an art form. She never hid her quirks. She wore them like armor. She never apologized for taking up space. She expanded it. Even now her presence lingers in her photographs, in her interviews, in that unmistakable laugh that still pops up in movie montages. Because legends don't vanish, they just learn how to whisper louder than the noise. Diane Keaton's story isn't about surviving Hollywood. It's about outsmarting it with humor, heart, and a quiet kind of courage that no spotlight can ever outshine. Here's the secret Diane Keaton never told anyone. She was scared all the time. The red carpets, the interviews, the big moments. Behind every smile was panic. She once said, "Courage is just fear that's been rehearsed." People thought she was fearless because she didn't play by the rules, but the truth? She was terrified of being ordinary, of blending in, of disappearing into someone else's idea of who she should be. That fear became her engine. It's why she wore men's suits when everyone told her to wear gowns. It's why she said no to marriage, no to Hollywood beauty standards, no to the script that said women only mattered when men desired them. She was the chaos Hollywood didn't know it needed. And every time someone said, "You can't do that," she smiled and said, "Watch me." Even in her 70s, Diane was still reinventing herself, still showing up to movie sets with notebooks full of ideas, questions, and a kind of fearless curiosity that younger stars could barely fake. She didn't chase trends. She became them. Fear didn't break her. It built her into something unshakable. And maybe that's the real lesson. You don't wait to be fearless before you act. You act while you're shaking. And that's what makes you unforgettable. When people ask Diane Keaton how she wants to be remembered, she laughs. "Remembered," she says, "I'm too busy living." That's the energy that made her eternal. She never performed life like a movie. She lived it like art. She turned eccentricity into elegance. She turned awkward pauses into punchlines. She made aging, the one thing Hollywood fears most, look like rebellion. Her secret weapon wasn't beauty, fame, or money. It was authenticity. Every hat, every oversized blazer, every unfiltered laugh was a declaration. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. And people didn't just take it. They worshipped it. Because in a world obsessed with pretending, Diane Keaton never faked a thing. She never chased relevance. She never begged for approval. She just was. That's what made her magnetic. That's what made her timeless. The real scandal: she built a legacy not by being perfect, but by being imperfect in public. She taught the world that you can be scared, messy, loud, weird, and still shine brighter than anyone trying to play it safe. Diane Keaton didn't just survive Hollywood. She outsmarted it, outlived it, and outclassed it. One laugh, one risk, one fearless choice at a time. And maybe that's the greatest performance of all. Hollywood never really understood Diane Keaton. They tried to fit her into boxes she didn't belong in. The quirky one, the eccentric hat wearer, the awkwardly funny sidekick. But she wasn't a type. She was a force, a mirror, reflecting what everyone secretly feared to admit about themselves. The weirdness, the messiness, the fear of being too much and not enough all at the same time. And that's what scared Hollywood, because Diane Keaton couldn't be manufactured, couldn't be polished into something safe. She was raw, unpredictable, and completely herself. She arrived on set with notebooks full of observations, thoughts, questions, and sudden flashes of insight that made even veteran directors pause. While everyone else was busy blending in, Diane was showing the world a radical concept. Fitting in is overrated. Her presence, her choices, her every unguarded laugh reminded the industry that authenticity, not youth, not beauty, not conformity, was the real power. She didn't chase trends. She didn't need approval. She broke rules quietly, but devastatingly. Wearing men's suits, oversized blazers, uncoordinated shoes, she turned what others might have seen as quirky or awkward into signature style. Every movement, every glance, every pause was purposeful, deliberate, but it never screamed calculated. The real scandal wasn't that she was different. The scandal was that she worked. Every line of dialogue she touched, every silent moment in front of the camera, she transformed into something alive, unforgettable, and intensely human. She exposed the hollowness of Hollywood's obsession with perfection. And then she smiled, that hesitant, nervous, genuine smile that seemed small, but carried a weight no one else could see. That smile was rebellion. That smile said, "I will not apologize for being who I am, and if that scares you, that's your problem." The world didn't just watch Diane Keaton. They felt her. They saw the courage it takes to stand in the spotlight when your heart is trembling, when the world expects a mask and still say, "I refuse to be anyone else." She was more than a star. She was a lesson in survival, a blueprint in defiance. She taught us that the only way to outlast Hollywood, to outlive the fleeting obsession with youth, fame, and beauty, is to be undeniably yourself in every laugh, every tear, every awkward pause that others wish they could erase. And here's the truth Hollywood could never admit. Diane Keaton didn't just survive the industry, she outsmarted it. She didn't just become legendary, she reshaped what it meant to be legendary, turning imperfection into art, awkwardness into elegance, fear into fuel. That's the part they never saw coming. That's the part that still makes her immortal. Because while Hollywood chased masks, Diane Keaton lived in truth. And truth never dies. The reason people still talk about Diane Keaton isn't because of nostalgia. It's because of recognition. When you see her on screen, you see yourself, the part of yourself that refuses to follow the script, that struggles to belong, that laughs awkwardly in silence, that feels fear and joy in the same heartbeat. She made aging look like rebellion. She made insecurity look like artistry. She made imperfections, quirks, and hesitation, not flaws, but statements. Every wrinkle became poetry, every unpolished line, every awkward pause, every unplanned moment became proof that life is messy, messy is human, and humanity is beauty. Diane taught a generation that growing older isn't fading away, it's arriving. It's stepping into the world, fully alive, fully seen, fully imperfect, and saying, "Here I am and I'm enough." She turned what Hollywood fears most, age, uncertainty, and vulnerability, into her greatest weapon. Every actress who sees Diane standing tall, unapologetic, hats perched on her head like crowns, every young artist who feels the weight of expectation and still dares to dream, that's Diane's legacy. It's in the courage she gave us, the audacity to embrace fear, the permission to be fully, recklessly human. The hats, the laughter, the awkward glances, the unguarded moments, these were never props. They were a philosophy. A radical declaration that you do not need to fit anyone else's definition of perfect to be remembered, to be revered, to matter. Diane Keaton didn't just perform in movies. She performed life, and she performed it for us. Every shy smile, every trembling hand, every quiet decision to step into the unknown became a lesson. Don't wait to be fearless. Act while you're shaking. Laugh while you're trembling. Live while you're scared. And that's why she's more than a legend. That's why she is eternal, because she taught the world that true courage is quiet, resilience is invisible, and authenticity is louder than any spotlight. She didn't chase fame. She became it on her terms. She didn't seek approval. She gave it to the world by daring to be real. She didn't perform for others. She performed for herself, and by doing so, she gave us permission to live in truth too. So the next time someone tells you to conform, to hide, to soften, or to shrink, think of Diane. Think of the hats, the laughter, the trembling courage. Think of someone who refused to disappear. And remember, being unforgettable isn't about playing it safe. It's about being fully, unapologetically, and brilliantly yourself. Exactly like Diane Keaton did every single day of her extraordinary life. Diane Keaton's story wasn't just the movies. It wasn't just the red carpets, the Oscars, or the iconic hats. It was the quiet battles she fought every single day, battles that no one saw, battles that Hollywood pretended didn't exist. She fought fear, a constant, gnawing presence that whispered, "You're not enough. You don't belong." Every audition that ended in rejection felt like proof of that fear. Every cold apartment in New York, every night of near starvation, every moment she questioned whether her dream was worth the cost. That was the real struggle. And yet she persisted, not with fanfare, not with applause. She persisted silently, letting each no, each disappointment, fuel her artistry. That fear, that loneliness, became the backbone of every unforgettable performance she gave. People remember the laughter, the turtlenecks, the wit, the eccentric charm. But what made Diane Keaton legendary was the resilience behind it all. The hours nobody saw, the scripts rewritten at 3 a.m., the tears cried in empty dressing rooms, the courage to show up again and again when every instinct screamed to quit. That's the lesson hidden behind the glamour. Greatness isn't born in applause. It's carved out in silence, in invisible struggle, in moments when the world is asleep and only your own heartbeat keeps you alive. Diane didn't perform perfection. She performed truth, and that truth resonated because it was raw, unfiltered, and unshakable. The world may have celebrated her achievements, but her real victories, the ones that mattered, happened in private, in the quiet, in the relentless pursuit of a life that honored herself above all else. And maybe that's the most scandalous thing of all, that in a world obsessed with image, Diane Keaton's true power came not from how she looked, but from how real she dared to be. Diane Keaton didn't just leave movies behind, she left lessons etched in light, shadow, and laughter. Every young actress who felt overlooked, every woman who felt too much or not enough, every human who feared showing themselves fully. Diane's life was proof that you could survive, thrive, and even redefine the rules without sacrificing your soul. Her legacy isn't measured in awards, box office numbers, or red carpet appearances. It's measured in the invisible ways she changed the world, teaching women to embrace eccentricity, reminding artists to value truth over approval, giving the timid courage to speak and the broken the permission to laugh. Even her friendship with Goldie Hawn wasn't just Hollywood camaraderie. It was a sanctuary, a private rebellion against the cruelty, competition, and loneliness of the industry. Together, they turned off-camera moments into lessons in loyalty, trust, and unguarded joy, the kind of joy that heals. That laughter, the shared whispers, the quiet acts of support, those were her real performances, and they lasted longer than any scene in a movie. Diane's home, her camera, her hats, the handwritten notes to her children, all of it tells the same story. Life is not about being perfect. It's about creating meaning, carving joy, and leaving traces of yourself that others can carry forward. The scandal, if you can even call it that, is how ordinary it all looks at first glance. But in those ordinary moments, she performed the extraordinary. She showed how to turn fear into fuel, silence into expression, loneliness into art, and aging into poetry. The world will remember her for the films. Her friends and family remember her for the love, the small, unrecorded moments of care, courage, and humor. And that is the legacy no award can capture. the quiet, indelible proof that a life lived fully, bravely, and unapologetically leaves a mark that time cannot erase. Diane Keaton didn't just exist. She illuminated existence for everyone who watched, listened, or dared to follow her example. She taught us that laughter, truth, and courage are timeless, that authenticity never ages, and that love, when given fully, doesn't end with life. And so even as cameras dim and the world moves on, Diane's presence lingers. In the air, in the laughter, in the hats perched just so, in the echoes of courage that every person who knew her and every soul who admired her from afar will carry forever. Some friendships in Hollywood are fleeting, transactional, built on shared fame or publicity. But Diane Keaton's friendship with Goldie Hawn was different. It wasn't about cameras, scripts, or awards. It was about survival, laughter, and truth. When they first met on the set of The First Wives Club, they seemed like opposites. Diane, disciplined, meticulous, carrying decades of careful observation and silent battles. Goldie, sunlight incarnate, effervescent, unpredictable, laughing as if the world couldn't touch her. On the surface, they were different worlds colliding, but underneath, something extraordinary began to form. It started with a moment so small, most people would have missed it. Goldie noticing Diane shivering on a cold New York street, draping her coat around her shoulders without a word. Diane smiled. A rare, small smile that cracked the armor she had spent a lifetime building. In that instant, a silent understanding formed. These two women would become each other's refuge in a world designed to isolate, judge, and compete. Off-camera, they became co-conspirators, laughing until they cried, whispering secrets that no one else could hear, comforting each other when the lights dimmed and the applause faded. They taught each other that true friendship isn't about perfection. It's about showing up when the world has already turned its back. It's about laughing through heartbreak and holding space for someone else's truth without judgment. For Diane, this friendship was a lifeline. Hollywood had always demanded masks, but with Goldie she could breathe. She could falter, stumble, and still be fully herself without fear. And for Goldie, Diane was a mirror, a reminder that it's possible to live with integrity, humor, and courage, even in the harshest spotlight. Their bond wasn't glamorous. It wasn't about parties or publicity. It was about survival, trust, and shared humanity. And that's why it mattered. Because in Hollywood, where careers rise and fall like waves and loyalty is rare, Diane Keaton and Goldie Hawn created something that would outlast every red carpet and every headline. A sanctuary. That sanctuary wasn't just for them. It became a symbol for millions of fans watching from afar, proof that even in a world obsessed with perfection and image, it's possible to create authentic, unshakable connection. And that, in itself, was revolutionary. Diane Keaton's true legacy isn't just the movies, the awards, or the timeless fashion choices. It's the lessons she left behind, the invisible inheritance she gave to anyone brave enough to pay attention. She taught the world that vulnerability is strength, that showing fear, uncertainty, or imperfection isn't weakness. It's courage in its purest form. Every trembling hand, every hesitant smile, every awkward pause on screen was a lesson. You can be fully yourself and still be unforgettable. She showed that laughter is not just a sound, it's a form of survival. In her most joyful moments, it carried the weight of decades of pain, rejection, and resilience. In every smile, she reminded us that life is messy, and that the ability to find joy in that mess is one of the most radical acts of all. She redefined success. It wasn't about fame, fortune, or applause. It was about integrity, creativity, and the courage to keep going when everything else told you to quit. She survived Hollywood not by following the rules, but by rewriting them. Quietly, deliberately, and brilliantly. And she left a map for anyone who felt unseen, unheard, or inadequate. Her life whispered, "Don't shrink, don't hide. Don't apologize for being too much. Don't wait to be perfect. Live now, laugh fully, and take up space." Even her children, her private sanctuary, her friendships, every choice, every quiet act of love became proof that a life well lived isn't measured by accolades, but by the courage to be human, to love openly, and to leave behind traces of light for others to follow. And in the quietest moments, When the cameras were gone and the applause had faded, Diane Keaton's influence was still alive, in every young actress daring to be herself, in every person choosing authenticity over conformity, in every heart that refuses to let fear dictate its story. That's the kind of legacy that doesn't fade, that doesn't need headlines, that whispers through time, softly but insistently, reminding the world that true greatness isn't about being admired. It's about being real. And Diane Keaton, she didn't just leave films or awards behind. She left the courage to live boldly, to laugh fearlessly, and to turn even the most ordinary moments into something unforgettable. That is her gift to the world, to her friends, to her family, and to everyone willing to truly see her. When Diane Keaton passed, the world noticed the headlines, the tributes, and the flashing cameras, but the truth of her life, the depth of her influence, existed in silence, quiet moments that no one could stage or script. Think about the empty chairs she left behind, the hat racks she never refilled, the camera still pointed at a sunbeam she never captured, the handwritten notes she left for her children. These weren't just objects. They were echoes of a life lived fully, deliberately, and bravely. They whispered to anyone who would listen that love, creativity, and courage don't need validation. They need presence. Diane's silence was never emptiness. It was meaning. Every quiet walk through Palm Springs, every barefoot step across cool tiles, every photograph taken and left undeveloped, they were her way of teaching the world that beauty doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it exists in the space between laughter and tears, in the pause between lines, in the shadows of moments most people overlook. The scandal of this silence, if you can even call it that, is that it's louder than any applause. It lasts longer than any award. It challenges us to pay attention, to look closer, and to remember that the most profound truths in life are rarely announced. Diane's life reminds us that what we leave behind is measured not in recognition, but in the quiet, lasting impact we have on hearts, souls, and memories. And when Goldie Hawn spoke at her memorial, clutching that single white rose, trembling under the weight of grief, it wasn't just a tribute. It was proof that Diane's presence, even in absence, could make silence feel holy, laughter feel eternal, and love feel unending. That is the most powerful story she left behind, one the world is still learning to hear. And finally, Diane Keaton's greatest gift. Her light, not the Hollywood spotlight that cast her shadow across red carpets, not the flashes that immortalized her smile, but the quiet, enduring glow that changed lives. That light exists in every young artist daring to embrace imperfection. It exists in every person who laughs through heartbreak, who chooses authenticity over approval, who turns fear into art. It exists in the love she gave to her children, in the laughter shared with Goldie Hawn, in the images she captured with her camera, and in the subtle lessons hidden in the hats she wore and the script she held close. Her influence didn't end with her final breath. It ripples outward, touching hearts who may never have met her, teaching them that life is not about perfection, applause, or compliance. Life is about showing up fully, honestly, and fearlessly. Diane's journey was proof that every setback, every lonely night, every whispered doubt can become a stepping stone to extraordinary courage. In a world obsessed with permanence and recognition, Diane Keaton's real triumph was ephemeral. It cannot be bought, duplicated, or captured fully by cameras. It lives in moments of courage, connection, and laughter, in the way a friend listens, a child feels loved, a stranger dares to be themselves. And maybe that is the most scandalous, thrilling, and beautiful truth of all. Diane didn't just exist on screen. She existed in every human heart that witnessed her truth, her resilience, her joy. Her laughter still echoes, her courage still inspires, her love still teaches, and her silence, it has never been empty. It has always been full of wisdom, warmth, and a reminder that life, even in its fleetingness, can be extraordinary when lived unapologetically. Diane Keaton's light didn't die. It simply changed form. From performance to memory, from laughter to inspiration, from life to legend. And as long as someone remembers her, smiles at her work, or whispers her name in reflection, that light continues to burn, soft, eternal, and unbreakable. The world saw Diane Keaton as the embodiment of charm, wit, and grace, a star who walked red carpets, held Oscars, and commanded the screen with effortless brilliance. But what the world rarely saw were the battles she fought in silence. Behind every smile, every poised gesture, every perfectly timed laugh, there was a story of resilience few could imagine. Imagine being constantly scrutinized, every movement dissected, every choice judged, every relationship weighed against impossible standards. Hollywood didn't forgive vulnerability, and Diane learned that early. Yet instead of bending under pressure, she turned every struggle into a canvas. Every rejection audition, every cold apartment in Manhattan, every night spent alone writing lines by candlelight, these weren't just hardships. They were her training ground, her laboratory for the extraordinary artistry that would later define her career. The silence of those nights was deafening. Some might call it loneliness. Diane called it preparation. She studied herself as meticulously as she studied scripts, watching her fears, observing her instincts, questioning every impulse, and transforming it all into performances that could shatter hearts or coax laughter in the same breath. And it wasn't just the early struggles. Fame came with its own invisible chains. Success is seductive, but it's also unforgiving. Every accolade brought its own shadow, the pressure to repeat brilliance, the fear of fading relevance, the gnawing question of whether the world would ever see her and not just the roles she played. Diane's solution was radical in its simplicity. She refused to perform for approval. She performed to survive, to turn fear into courage, emptiness into art, and vulnerability into a language everyone could understand, even if they didn't realize it at the time. That was the scandal no one reported. Diane Keaton's greatest battles were not in public, not on stage, not in front of cameras. They were internal. Battles that demanded courage every single day, and the fact that she emerged not just victorious but luminous, that she could turn her suffering into laughter, her fear into truth, and her quiet desperation into a legacy that inspires millions, is the real story Hollywood rarely dares to tell. In a world obsessed with perfection, Diane taught us that perfection is a trap. That brilliance comes from embracing the cracks, the flaws, the nights spent shivering and hungry, the moments of uncertainty that no one else sees. And through it all, she created a career, a life, and a legacy that proves that the most extraordinary triumphs are often invisible to the eye until someone chooses to pay attention. Diane Keaton's life wasn't just a collection of films, awards, or fashion statements. It was a roadmap for anyone who has ever felt unseen, underestimated, or unworthy of the spotlight. Her legacy isn't on the screen. It's in the hearts of those she touched, the people she inspired, and the countless lives that learned to see themselves through her courage. Think about the countless young actresses who, for decades, have entered auditions trembling, questioning if they belonged, doubting their talent, their looks, their worth. Diane's example whispered a quiet but powerful truth. It's not about fitting in. It's about being fully, unapologetically yourself, flaws and all. Her turtlenecks, oversized glasses, eccentric hats. They weren't just style. They were statements. I will not hide. I will not conform. I will define myself on my own terms. And it wasn't only about appearances, it was about how she treated the people around her. The crew who remembered her kindness, the peers who remembered her integrity, the young artists who felt seen because she stopped, listened, and acknowledged them in a way that so few in her industry ever would. She showed the world that respect, empathy, and human connection are as revolutionary as any performance. Even her children carry her legacy. Through every bedtime story, every breakfast burnt from distraction, every whispered "I love you" in the dark, she taught them that life is not about perfection. It's about persistence, love, and courage. And now, as they navigate a world without her physical presence, that legacy lives in every choice they make, every kindness they extend, every moment of bravery they summon. Diane's laughter, her silence, her relentless pursuit of truth, all of it continues to ripple outward, touching anyone willing to listen. Every moment of fear she transformed into art, every private victory she kept hidden, every act of kindness that went unnoticed, these are her footprints across the world. They are invitations to live fully, to dare, to embrace imperfection, to laugh in the face of hardship, and to turn even the darkest silence into something beautiful. The final scandal, if you could call it that, is this. Diane Keaton didn't just leave behind a life or a name. She left behind a movement of authenticity, a silent revolution that teaches us that to be human is to be radiant, resilient, and endlessly fascinating. And as long as someone dares to live openly, laugh fearlessly, and love without reservation, her light continues to burn, soft, steady, and eternal.